Alright, let's start the second part of leading and managing for a safe and effective care environment. The first thing we're going to really discuss is now we're going to look a little bit more at the role of managers and what managers actually need to do. So you need to remember and keep in the back of your head that managers are not necessarily leaders. Ideally, in the perfect world, they are both. But remember that managers' whole job, they are the individuals who are in a role of authority and or power, so their whole job is going to be that whole day-to-day operations of making the units run, whether they're at a first level, second level, third level, which we'll talk about in a few slides, but they're going to be coordinating the tasks, and they're going to both be managing both the people side of things and the money side of things. So their whole purpose is to keep the unit going on a day-to-day basis, which is going to involve all kinds of things like planning, organizing, supervising, staffing, evaluating, negotiating, which is one of those things that was kind of a fun part of my job. I never really have had the opportunity to negotiate for much in my life. So having that ability as a clinical director was a lot of fun when we got to big equipment buys and things along those lines. They're also going to function, or need to hopefully be functioning, to clarify the organizational structure so that the first line workers understand the mission, vision, and philosophy of the place in which they are working. And then obviously if they are the ones who are working to manage, control both the human and fiscal resources, the goal that they're trying to achieve is superb patient care, so we need to constantly be evaluating the care that has been provided and coming up with a feedback loop so that we're constantly in the know of what's going on. So those are kind of some of the responsibilities that a manager is going to have. When you look at the way of how a manager is going to function, there's a process, a management process, just like there's a nursing process. And the steps are going to be that seem very familiar because they do mimic in a lot of ways the nursing process, where you have planning, organizing, leading, and then controlling. So the first step is the planning. We got to set the direction, set the goals, decide on what course of action we're going to take. And hopefully when we're deciding this course of action, we've done a little bit of investigation to figure out what our problems are, what our resources are that we have available, and where the gap is between those two things. But this is the point, especially if it's a true leader who's in that management role, where the vision and strategies are going to start to take shape, and hopefully from a unit level, those are mimicking the hospital level's mission and visions too. So once we've made our plan, we've got the vision, we know what we want to do, then you got to organize and get your stuff together. So this is includes people, so this is really where we're aligning everybody to the same goal. So we're going to identify the work that needs to be accomplished, what goals we're hoping that we're going to achieve, make sure we have the right people doing the right things, and sometimes having the right people actually involves hiring the right people, but this is where we want the right person doing the right job. We want to, as much as we can, get everybody moving in the same direction, and anyone who has been a project manager of a large project knows that sometimes moving in one direction is a challenge. So sometimes you're taking a couple steps forward and a couple steps back, but as long as you're making overall forward process. And sometimes, unfortunately, what happens in this stage of the game is that you have to spin in circles a little bit to figure out exactly what direction you're going to go into. But this is really the phase where we're coordinating the work. Okay, we're getting everybody in the right places to do the job that needs to be done. It also includes delegation, which we know is an important part of life as a manager. I have to say it's probably one of my most challenging parts. I had a hard time delegating, but this is really important when we get to this stage, because as a manager, remember, I'm not supposed to do it all. I'm supposed to get the people who should be doing it kind of thing. Then that third step in here is leading. So this is really where we have to let the people who are working with us know that we believe in them, that they can do the job. We want to make sure that everybody understands what the job is, that we keep that message in front of them all the time, because sometimes you get so mired down in the work you're doing that you forget sight of the goal at the end of it. So that's what we want to do in this leading phase. Keep the message clear, keep the consistency between the words and the deeds and the things that they're seeing done. So this is kind of that whole aspect where we want to keep things going. The work has started in the organizing phase. Now here we're working and we're continuing to lead them in the process of what they're doing. And then the controlling phase of this is really, in a lot of ways, from the nursing process perspective, that whole evaluation phase. So at this point, we need to make sure that we've accomplished some goal. How are we going to measure that the goal is continuing to be met? How are we going to evaluate the performance of the work we did? How are we going to set up our feedback loops? How are we going to make sure that we're keeping the same quality? So that's kind of with controlling. We want to control that the quality output continues to be quality. And I guess I should have restated that and said that we want to make sure that we're controlling that the output continues to be quality output. So that's what the whole focus of this section is kind of that evaluation of the performance we've been doing and making sure that we've got a process in place to keep doing it. Because typically in nursing, it's not a one-time thing. We have to continue to do over and over and over and over again the same processes day in and day out. We want to make sure that we are getting the same level of outcome that we got the first time we instituted a new process. Alright, we can't have a leadership class and not go into a little bit of the different leadership theories. You will see a lot of different theories out there. These are the ones I'm going to focus on in our class. It is not an exclusive or exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. Your book actually goes into a few others, but these are the ones that I find to be most often tested over or discussed when we get into NCLEX and HESI world. So these are the ones that I've chosen to kind of highlight at this point. So a few big theories we're going to look at: behavioral, transactional, and transformational. We're going to go into behavioral first. This is a fairly old theory. It actually began in the early 30s, and it really focused on the abilities and behaviors of leaders, including what the leaders actually do. There are 4 basic types, and these should be somewhat repetitive to you. Hopefully you have heard these before. You've got your autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire, and bureaucratic. So your autocratic is that authoritative one, the very directive one. Leader makes the decisions for the groups, okay? Individuals are thought to be externally motivated, meaning that if I don't tell them to do something, they won't do it kind of mentality. It also has a strong belief in coercion or punishment system. So we don't inspire by rewards necessarily as much as we do by punishment or fear of punishment. Now this doesn't sound like a very effective leadership style. It's not one that I think most of us would choose to work in on a day-to-day basis, but it does have its place. One of the times when it does have its places is like in an emergency situation. During a code, you want somebody who is your code leader to be fairly autocratic. They're making the decisions, they know the algorithms, they know what needs to be done. They're just saying, hey, you do this, hey, you do that. Hopefully it's not really truly, hey, you. Hopefully they at least know the names of the individuals involved, but you get the picture, okay? Democratic, just like it sounds, it's consultative. It assumes that individuals are motivated by something internally or within them. And the leader has a desire to get tasks done, but they know that they need to use participation and majority rules to get there. Not a bad way to go. This is a lot of the aspect with shared governance, where hopefully we're allowing the first line workers, the bedside staff, to be involved in making the decisions. That would be in a democratic leadership style. Then you've got laissez-faire. Again, I think this is nothing new to most people. It's that kind of non-directive and permissive leadership style. Some would say it's a lazy leadership style. Again, you are assuming, just like in democratic, that individuals are motivated by something within themselves to do the job at which they're being asked to do. It leaves the individual ultimately to make the decisions about how to complete the work that they're being asked to do and how and when to get it done. It is a very much a hands-off leadership approach, and again, it sounds like this might be a lazy style or not an optimal style, but it kind of is that macro manager, that if I have the right people doing the job, I don't necessarily need to be the one making all the decisions as the leader. This is actually the kind of leadership style that I personally like to work with, and give me the job that needs to be done, but let me do it. Let me come up with the ideas, let me come up with the solutions, and give me guidance and feedback along the way to make sure that I'm staying on the path of the organization or of the department or of the whatever. But laissez-faire is not necessarily lazy as long as I have good employees and good followers working underneath me. So that's a laissez-faire. Then bureaucratic is a little bit more of an company man perspective. And what I mean by that is when you have a bureaucratic leadership style, it's fairly inflexible. It assumes that individuals, again, just like with autocratic, are motivated by external forces, meaning that if I don't have consequences to behaviors in place, they won't necessarily choose to do the right thing. And really, this is one of those bizarre styles where, because you are a part of a conglomerate or of a large organization, the leader nor the followers are truly making the decisions. Someone above them is making the decisions, and you just enact whatever decisions come down. So you're relying on organizational policies and rules to truly identify the goals and direct the workflow of the unit. Okay? Again, there is a place for this. It's not necessarily the easiest environment to work within if you've got a fairly strong individual, creative individual who likes to have that creative outlet. But those are the behavioral styles of leadership: autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire, and bureaucratic. Then the next leadership theory we'll talk about is going to be transactional. And just like it sounds, in my head when I think transactional leadership, I always think of it like a bank transaction or an exchange, that everything has a cost and a price. This is built on the principles of social exchange, that individuals engage in some kind of social interaction, but they expect to give and receive rewards. Okay, if I do this, you'll do that. It's a transaction. There's a price for everything, and everything has a price. Leaders are most successful in this theory of leadership when there's an exchange process between the leaders and followers, and when they understand and meet the needs of the followers. So essentially, if you can keep your employees happy and motivated, this will continue to be fairly effective. This is the leadership theory where incentives are used to enhance follower loyalty and performance. So essentially, if you do this, I'll give you that kind of aspect. Okay. It does, to some extent, foster interdependence, which isn't necessarily a bad thing when the team members are all reliant on each other. It can unfortunately have a couple of situations where you have somebody who's really strong in providing or performing in one area, where if that individual leaves for whatever reason, then that area is very much missed. So pros and cons to all of these. Then the last one we're going to talk about is transformational. This is honestly kind of the gold standard in literature lately. It's not necessarily the only way to be. There are other ways to be effective as well. But when we're talking about transformational leadership styles, we're really emphasizing the interpersonal relationships. And the whole focus on this leadership theory is that change is good. We don't want to just maintain the status quo. We want to continue to grow and flourish and come up with new ideas and do new things that have never been done before, kind of aspect. So hopefully the leader in this style is going to generate the followers' commitment to some sort of vision that the leader also carries or has with them. This is a very inspirational theory or style of leadership where you truly inspire followers to go along with you for the ride of whatever it is that you're offering. And the followers actually have a lot of power in this aspect to make an impact on the organization and on the bottom line of whatever that bottom line is. So that's your three main theories that we're going to talk about, or that I want you guys to. Alright, then we got to talk a little bit about levels of management. I alluded to this in the last one, that you've got first, middle, and upper. They're also sometimes called first, second, third, but typically you'll see it as first, middle, and upper. First level manager is responsible for the day-to-day activities, okay? So a lot of times this is like your charge nurse or your team leader. So, and this is not just some random person who is charged for the day, but this is somebody who holds the role of charge nurse. So that charge nurse actually has responsibility for how the unit is running, where the patients are being placed, how the resources are being utilized. So that's your first level of manager. Then the next step is a middle level manager. This is the world that I lived with, and this is like your clinical directors. They're responsible for supervising the first level managers, but they're also responsible for being the liaison or the go-between between the first level and the staff nurses and the upper level. So this is truly the person who's in the middle of the sandwich. And that was probably one of my biggest dissatisfiers in that kind of role, is that I felt no matter what I did, I was either making the first level happy and the upper level unhappy, or, as we all know, it's in our best interest to make the upper level happy, which then meant that potentially my first level was not going to be happy. So these people are a lot of times stuck in the middle, just like the name alludes. And then you've got your upper level managers, which really are looking at the big picture, the strategic goals for the organization. They're helping decide that direction. So this is like your vice presidents of nursing. And you got to keep in mind, titles are just that. They're titles. They're made up. We sometimes will attribute bigger titles to lower level positions, especially when you compare it across the city, or across the state, and across the country. It was one of the things that was really challenging for me to get used to when I went to Big Barns, because in SSM, as a clinical director, I was that nurse manager of the unit, or what used to be known as the head nurse. At big barns, a clinical director is actually more like a service line director, and they're almost at a vice president level, where the nurse manager was the clinical director. So it was just a matter of semantics. So you really don't get hung up on the words or the titles. Look at the job duties and responsibilities to decide if they're first, middle, or upper level. All right, some essential characteristics that a manager needs to have. Again, we were focusing before on leader, and hopefully you have a manager who is also a leader. But if you just have a manager who doesn't happen to be a leader, their ultimate goal or objective of which they're measured by is becoming outcome oriented. We are measured by the outcomes we produce, and that is never more true than it is in a manager. Okay, we want a manager who has the ability to problem solve and think and to build the teams. Now again, those skills will cross over into a leader aspect, and that is definitely something we would like to obtain. But the manager needs to make sure that everybody's on the same page, we're using our resources wisely, and that we are always keeping our eye on the prize, which in the hospital world is patient safety. Okay, so you've got to understand that from the nurse manager's scope, they need to be focusing on clinical excellence, providing some sort of organization and coordination of both the human and the physical resources, as well as they're going to have a little bit of a role in strategic development for the overall organization, at least if nothing else by accurately depicting their usage of resources, because when you're looking at your strategic plan for the organization, you need to understand, or the managers above, the upper managers need to understand, what are our resources that we're using and which ones do we really truly need. So those are all some of the characteristics of an effective manager. And we really can't talk about leadership in management without having a little bit of a discussion about power, because unfortunately, being in those roles does definitely give an individual power. There is definitely different ways that that power can be utilized, but we need to realize that a leader has to have influence. They need to have their own personal and professional values and visions. They need to be able to demonstrate that they're competent in whatever interpersonal technical skills that will speak to the individuals who they are working for. And they ultimately need to have a very good understanding of their sphere of influence or circle of influence, because we can get all hung up in lengthy discussions about the wrongs of the world, and there are things that are so far out of our control that it is just a wasteless expenditure of energy. To really be able to manage and utilize the power effectively of these positions, you need to understand what is truly in the realm of your world to be able to have any kind of impact or any kind of control over. And it's not to say that there's not some value in letting others vent, but this is one of the things that I get very frustrated with, even in this world here, where we talk forever about how we would change the world, how we would change corporate Chamberlain, how we would whatever. Honestly, changing the corporate level of this organization is probably out of my sphere of influence, but I can, and hopefully do, have a very positive impact on the students in which I'm teaching at any given moment in time. That's kind of what we're talking about, from knowing and understanding where your power lies. There are certain types of power that individuals may have. If you have the power to reward, means that you are able to provide incentives to the people who are working under you, whether it be financial, emotional, anything. I mean, it honestly can be anything, but if you have the power to reward, that does give you quite a bit of power in a leadership role. But you can be amazingly effective in a leadership role without that power to reward, whether you have the ability to control the incentives or not. You could also have coercive power. I'm sure we have all experienced this. This is ultimately when the leader has the ability to withhold, and that could be withholding an incentive, or to punish. If you don't do this, this is going to happen to you. And we all know that that is a fairly effective form of power for a leader to have. It's not necessarily the one they should pull out first. But if you do not have the power to punish, some would argue you have no power. I would argue you do have power, it's just of a different kind, and it depends how you do some of the other things. One of the things to keep in mind when we're talking about it is, do they truly have legitimate power? Do they have the power granted to them by a higher entity within that organization to do the things like reward and punish. If not, honestly, unless we allow them to have that power, they don't have power. So legitimate power. Do they have the ability to do reward, punishment, etc.? There's also power in being the expert. We know that experts, whether we're talking in a legal field or an academic field or whatever, experts have a certain amount of power. We know that their knowledge, experience, and expertise makes them a little bit more knowledgeable and powerful than somebody who does not have their same level of expertise. There is a lot of power in being the know-it-all to a certain extent, as long as you can back up the know-it-allness. Okay, then you've got referent power. This is respect and regard for the leader's character and talents, that they're somewhat reverent, that the followers who are following them have a tremendous amount of respect for their abilities, their characteristics, or their character and their talents. That's referent. Then you've got charismatic leaders or charismatic power. These are the abilities to inspire and attract others. This, to me, is true inborn, inbred leadership qualities. And for some reason, some people just seem to have it. I think it is a character or a trait that you can hone or that you can build on, but it's not something that everybody's going to possess no matter how hard they try. That's charismatic power. And then the last slide on this section is just rules for using power. And these are just basic common sense type things. If you have somebody who's very power hungry, they don't necessarily follow these rules, because the very first and foremost rule here is use the least amount of power you need to use to truly be effective in whatever it is you're doing. And then the other thing is you want to use the power that's appropriate for whatever given situation you are encountering at that point. If you hand out the harshest punishment for the mildest misdemeanor, that's not appropriate use of your power. And this is something that's sometimes challenging to learn how to do, is learn when not to use power. There are times when, as a leader, the best thing I can do is sit back, sit on my hands, bite my tongue, and just wait and see what's going to happen, because there's an awful lot of learning that's going to happen in that, and by doing that. Now, I need to make sure that there is no harm to be done by me doing that, but that is sometimes one of the most effective uses of power that I could ever begin to do. Okay? Again, make sure that we're always polite. We don't lose sight of the human niceties of our world. Just because I'm in a position of power does not mean I have the ability to demand and to be rude. Understand that we're going to need favors when we're in these kinds of positions, and that sometimes we can use our power to get what we need, but we want to make sure that we're repaying that in some way, shape, or form. So you guys can read through these different aspects, but we got to be aware all the time. It's something that I didn't quite truly understand until I was actually teaching. The power I have just by being the expert in the knowledge, and this is where that whole idea when I told you all in PEDS or in OB about Jennyisms, that when I say something's a Jennyism, I know that I speak with such authority and that I have a certain amount of power just by the position I'm in, that I could be making something up and you guys would never know about it or never be any the wiser. So I need to be very conscientious of that and make sure that I'm very clearly telling you all when I am just kind of logicking through a problem. Alright, that's going to wrap up this section. I'll talk to you guys soon.